Cool. So, hey, I'm Grant, one of the founders, CEO of Replicated. Thank you all for coming. Really excited to have you here. Really excited for Mitchell to be here. It's probably why you came. Founder of HashiCorp, CTO of HashiCorp, an amazing force in the DevOps ecosystem. Creator of Vagrant and Consul and Terraform and lots of great technologies. The guy that you don't know as well is my co-founder Marc, who is far smarter than the two of us. But Marc has had a great career throughout DevOps in terms of my favorite story to tell about Marc is his first job was as installing networks in prisons throughout the state of Michigan. So, he's really had every role throughout the stack, from network admin, sysadmin, front end, back end, mobile. You kind of name it, Marc has done it. And so, everything we've built at Replicated really came from Marc's experience as, working throughout the stack. I'm just going to kick it over. It's going to be a super casual conversation between these two guys. I think they're comfortable with you guys just kind of asking questions if things come up you're thinking about. Here we are.
Cool. Thanks, Grant. Mitchell, thanks for coming out tonight. To get started, I think, love just to hear kind of how you got started into tech, your first job.
Okay.
How you get started.
Okay. So I'm actually born and raised in the LA area, suburbs, but LA area. So I actually got started as a sort of Rails dev consultant during that hype phase where Rails could build any website in the world in 2 months. And I worked for a consultancy down here. And that's what sort of kick-started everything. I mean, I was dev, but I was always super attracted to the opsy problems. And we had ops people, so I was always watched them and learned from them. And it was really interesting. It was at the same time that cloud was coming up and all that stuff. So that's sort of where I got started here in LA. But I did go to school out of state, so I left for a while.
But you came back to LA.
Recently, like 3 years ago, came back to LA.
Why did you make the decision to come back to LA instead of moving up to the Bay Area or somewhere else?
I moved from the Bay Area. I wanted to build a remote company, so HashiCorp is remote. Mostly, the only people that aren't remote are legal and finance for legal and compliance regulatory reasons. So they have to go to an office, but everybody else is remote. And so our company's almost 300 now, so that's 275 are remote roughly. And to make the remote experience authentic, I always wanted to leave. I think it's hard to be authentic when the leadership the founders at least are in the same city. So I actually left. My founder's still in the Bay Area. My co-founder is actually moving to Connecticut this fall. So we'll have our CEO and both founders all in different cities, which I think is part of the authentic experience of we have to, from the top down and the bottom up, create a culture and process that is remote friendly. So that was part of it, and then my family's down here and my fiance's down here. I had personal reasons that I needed to move down here, and I didn't want the company to run my personal life either, so it was all related.
Cool. It hasn't, you have to go up to San Francisco all the time. It hasn't caused any challenges being done?
I'm going tomorrow morning. No, but I only go once a month. So it fluctuates, right? So HashiCorp is about almost 6 years old. So I went from phases where I was going to San Francisco Monday to Thursday every week, to toning it down to 3 days every week, and then 2 days every other week. It's sort of, and at certain periods of the year when it's crazy, it goes back up and down. But at this point, it's toned down quite a lot. So I go basically 2 days a month now.
Cool. That's not much.
Yeah.
When you started off HashiCorp, did you intend to make it a fully distributed remote team? Was that an intentional decision?
Yeah, I think it comes out of the natural open source nature of what we do. So we're based in open source. All our primary projects are open source, and the way you work in open source is contributors that you've never met anywhere in the world, submitting work asynchronously, and our best candidates to hire when we started the company were these people that were passionately contributing to the projects without it being a company, with no financial incentive whatsoever. And we couldn't, again, authentically hire them if we didn't build a remote company. And so I would say it's both forced in a sense, and by design a little bit later. I mean, I never consciously thought like, we're gonna start this company, it's gonna be remote, we're gonna be, provocative about it or something. Like that was never the idea, but it turned out that way. But at a certain point, like the company gets big enough, you start hiring managers and stuff where you have to commit that like this is a remote company, because the way engineers work, the way managers work, the way you sort of organize communication and processes, like it's really hard to mix it. If it's either one or the other. And so there was a point early on, 20 people or something, where we had to finally like admit to ourselves, like, no, this is like, we're doing this. This is what we're doing. But up to that point, it was just natural.
It's probably created some challenges, giving you some advantages and created some challenges along the way. What were some of the challenges that it's created?
Yeah, I like to say that remote is like, it's zero sum with non-remote. Like it's just as expensive, just as like, you save money in different places. It's more expensive in other places. Like you can't do it for that reason. A lot of people say like, oh, remote's cheaper because you could hire in like middle of nowhere Iowa and pay them like much lower or whatever. And it's just maybe, but it's not true, because you end up paying a ton of money for other stuff. So financially, offsites, or when you bring the company together, something really expensive to fly 300 people to one place, really expensive at this point. We're renting out entire resorts to do that. Like that gets super expensive. So that kind of zeroes out to, it's just as expensive as getting a big office in San Francisco. But the benefits are, you could hire the best people. You could sort of work from home. I mean, that's a benefit to some people, it's a con to other people, but that naturally selects itself out of our employees. If you don't want to work from home, you don't work for us. Stuff like that. The challenges, though, are everywhere. All studied management practice. And I'll be honest, I'm a developer, so when I started being an adult, I guess, I was arrogantly thinking that management doesn't matter and marketing doesn't matter and all this other stuff doesn't matter. I since have a huge respect for all those roles, but all the traditional sort of management practices expect people to be in an office. All the workplace culture type education expects people to be under the same roof. All the office design, assumes an office. Besides that, there's I just randomly post on Reddit and Hacker News and make it my blog for the day. But it's sort of like I write these posts places about how the world is basically against you as a remote company. Like I unknowingly broke tons of laws, and HashiCorp had to pay an okay amount in fines. Not a lot, but we had to pay fines in 30 states because I was just hiring people wherever I wanted, and I didn't realize that I had to register as a business, and I had to, deal with workers' comp in a different way, and all this legal stuff that you have to deal with. It's overhead that you wouldn't have otherwise. Stuff like if you hire in another country, they have different laws, and you actually have to adhere to them. Just because you're in the U.S. doesn't mean that your little French employee is a U.S. employee. That's wrong. They're a French citizen. The French laws. Emailing them after hours is harassment, stuff like that, right? It's stuff like that you got to learn. And so there's all this stuff against you. Oh, the last one is tooling. Tooling is super against you too. So I just was complaining about this to JJ actually, but it's stuff like video conferencing. We're big enough where you have to buy video conferencing like a boring company. We go in, we negotiate with people in suits to buy video conferencing. We can't just sign up for Blue Jeans or something anymore. We need SLAs and stuff like that, because if the video conferencing's down, our company's down. So it's we'll pay for it. But you start paying for it, and we had so many people that quoted us, and we're like, well, it's this much per site. And we're like, the heck is a site? We have 200 something sites. You're treating us you're treating us like we're Facebook, and we just have one employee per site. And stuff like that's super against you. And it's well, every site needs a custom camera that you mount, and because they expect it to be a conference room. It's okay, this is this person's home office. It's maybe in their bedroom. It's we're not going to mount a wall automatic camera. And so stuff like this is super weird around tooling. And so there's a lot that makes it hard, that isn't the core competency of our business. That's frustrating, but I'm super passionate about maintaining that culture. I think it is the way of the future for companies, and so we're fighting that battle.
Yeah. I think we at Replicated, most our engineering team's all here in the office. We have a couple of people who are remote, but not on the core engineering team. And one of the challenges we've had when we thought about kind of branching out and having remote engineers is that communication, right? We have a bunch of engineers sitting around a room working on code, collaborating like in real life on a problem. There's like something lost about not writing it all down, but I imagine like you probably get all of that. You have to like, the only way to communicate is in writing, and it's in a video call, it's talking.
Yeah, and it's really hard for people. You have to over communicate because you lose something. You lose the body language, which you super don't value until it doesn't exist anymore. Really basic, innocent things get escalated to managers as like, this person's attacking me, and they didn't mean it that way at all. You have to over communicate. You have to talk about how you feel a lot more, which is particularly hard for engineers sometimes. You know, it comes off naturally, but when you talk, but not in text and not in emails. Yeah, if you have a meeting and you don't include somebody, like you have to make sure the meeting is documented, otherwise they feel excluded. Stuff like that is hard, but we've also had not a lot. I mean, we've had at least 5 employees over the years quit, not because they would quit and say like, love the company, love the products, loved my job. I need to sit next to someone. Like, couldn't do it, right? Like, it's just, they felt lonely, stuff like that. And we've tried stuff to counteract that. We've tried hour sessions where there's like open rooms that people could just go meet random people. We actually do something right now, I forgot what it's called. It's like a chat roulette though. Like, you just sign up, we shuffle some people, and then you get assigned a random person in the company. And we're at the size now where you probably haven't met that person, so that's fun. You get to meet, and I participate, our CEO participates, all our executives participate. So that's really fun because we had interns this summer, and it's cool for like an intern to be able to meet with like our CEO or something and ask whatever. But it's hard. Communication's really hard, and it filters certain types of people out.
I want to go back to like you were working down here in LA, in the suburbs of LA, doing some Rails work, and then fast forward some time passed, you wrote some open source code, decided to create HashiCorp. You had met Arman at the time. How did you end up meeting Arman and deciding to start HashiCorp?
Yeah, so Arman's my co-founder. He's a genius, like bona fide. Graduated college 2 years early. Went to college 2 years early. Just super smart guy. We met on a research project, and this is what's really cool. So I was on a research project at University of Washington in Seattle in 2008, 10 years ago. And in 2008, Seattle is, eyesight distance. Like UW is eyesight distance to Microsoft, Redmond, Amazon across the lake, and Google, which is pretty close. And so cloud, and they were all dabbling in this cloud idea. It wasn't super called that yet, but it was. And so a lot of the research was around that. So the research project that I happened to go on was this research project where Microsoft gave us servers in a box. It was a data center in a container, like a physical container. And Google gave us some computers. Amazon gave us some EC2 instances because EC2 was out. And a bunch of universities donated really crappy computers to us. And my job on that research project was to figure out how to manage all those servers in an automated fashion because we had like 10 students on the project. And so I had to figure out how to like wipe them, how to install software, how to deploy software. And they were running multiple operating systems. So we had another team actually, that was studying jails. And so we were studying Linux containers, LXC at the time. We're studying BSD, we're doing custom OS X kernels, kernel extensions to do stuff. Microsoft, we're working with them, and being at a university is cool because we had source access to Mac OS, Windows, and of course Linux open source. So we got to see all this and work with their engineers. That's what's cool about academia. And it was a total failure, but it's crazy looking back how much it shaped my expectation of what the world would become. Like that's what gave me and Arman, and I worked with Arman, the idea for Terraform and Consul and all that. Like, it was all written down during those years in college. And Arman was on this project. So I worked with him. He was actually the undergraduate project lead. So he worked with everybody. I reported to Arman as a student, and we had our like end of quarter report, and it's basically like, do you get the credits for the quarter or not? And I had to explain how I didn't achieve anything for the quarter. Like, I completely failed, but I still deserved the credits and why. and I didn't know it at the time, but we weren't friends yet. He was just like my boss. And he walked away from that super interested in the space. Like he walked away being like, he failed, but the problems are very real that he hit, and why aren't these solved and all that stuff. And so he emailed me out of the blue and wanted to talk about it. And we quickly started having breakfast every single day together. We started coding together. Like suddenly we were working on this stuff. And Armand's way academically smarter than me. I was not a good student, so he like absorbed actually like all the theory more than I did. And so he brought a whole new layer of rigor and cool ideas and like foundational stuff to the solutions I was thinking about.
Cool. And from the beginning, was the intent to keep it open source, write it all as open source?
Yeah, there was no intent to start a business. I mean, we didn't even intend to make money. We're just like, let's just solve these problems. It'll be fun. That was it.
And what changed that thought and decided let's start a business around this?
Oh, the crushing realities of adulthood, I think, changed that. It was, we graduated, and then the sudden realization that we had a job, and we got home from the job at like 8 p.m. and we were tired, and we couldn't just like code all day and have no responsibility. And so all these realities sort of forced us to think, how do we keep working on what we find passionate full time, or do we admit to ourselves that it's second class, not a priority, focus on our careers and just kind of go that way? And we chose the former. After it wasn't super easy. It seems easy, I guess, but it really wasn't. I'm actually like, Armand was ready. He's like risk tolerant. I'm pretty risk averse. So like the idea of quitting a job and like starting this thing and having no idea how to make money, like not for me, not my thing. But I was convinced.
Cool. Yeah, and especially doing it in open source, right? Because like, great, we're going to quit our jobs. We're going to go write open source software for a living, and trying to figure out how you're going to like pay those bills.
Yeah, and HashiCorp as a company didn't make any real money until like 2 years ago. So 4 years into the founding of the company, and so like. We made a lot of mistakes. We had no idea what we were doing, and we got lucky with good advisors and I think decent products and stuff that we figured it out. But it was, if I knew as much as I did now, I don't think I would have started the company. So I'm glad I had that. I'm glad I had that naivety or whatever.
And then, so as the open source projects gained traction, you decided to start making money, grow the company. Like, decided to make a move into enterprise at that point.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing too, because we're open source and we had millions of downloads, and I think the natural inclination, my opinion is that the natural inclination for an open source founder is to see millions of downloads and think, how do I turn that into money? Like, how do I make a little bit of money from each person, or a percentage of people? How do I make some money, and that'll translate to real money? It's sort of like the common business school like fallacy, which is like, oh, if it's like the music school thing where it's like, if I have a band and we release an album with 1,000 CDs and sell $10 a CD, we only need to sell 100 CDs to make real money. But turns out selling that percentage is really hard. Likewise with open source, those users expect free. They've been attuned to free. They bias towards free, and so, in my opinion, any sort of attempt to monetize those users is friction, and it's usually friction against someone who doesn't want to pay you, someone who isn't a paying person, right? There's the person who pays 99 cents for an app, and there's a person who thinks that's outrageous on their $1,000 phone. Like there's two different types of people, and so the open source user by default, and early enthusiasts in general, tend to bias, stereotyping, but tend to bias towards I have a $1,000 phone, which is like all my servers that are happening. There's no way I'm going to pay you for this like highly complex distributed system. Like, why would I pay you for that? And so that's fine, but they're important because they're enthusiasts that like get you adoption and get you legitimacy. They're super important, but my point is that they're hard to monetize. And so we discussed this, and we made this decision to go the opposite direction, which is let's monetize the user we don't really have. Let's monetize the people that don't blink when they have to spend $100,000 or something. I mean, that's really small for them. Let's sell to the Fortune 500. And how do we do that? And again, same thing. We're super naive, didn't really know how to do that at all. But this is where having our investors and having advisors actually really helped, because selling enterprise software is nothing new. And so we knew how to build open source software. We felt we did. Our advisors were learning about open source, but they had been part of multiple highly successful IPOs, exits, whatever, of enterprise software. And they're like, okay, this we know. This we could help you do. And so they started helping us do that. We started figuring out the product strategy to get sort of this enterprise model going, and that's what we do today. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I think that's good because a lot of the open source users never felt pressured to pay any money because that wasn't our design. But we're actually, it's not well known that Vault, we have a huge sales force. They wear suits. We have a huge support team that has crazy SLAs. Our average deal size is in the 6 figures a year. Like, a lot of people don't know that, and yeah, that's sort of what we decided to do.
So you just decided to, can you talk a little bit about the types of features, the changes, the differentiators in the enterprise version versus the open source version that was justifying those costs?
Yep, yeah. So it's really consistent, actually, so far that we found. I mean, we've only been monetizing for 2 years, but we've had a good 2 years, so I think we figured it out okay so far. It's really consistent. Enterprises want help with their heterogeneity. There's like a lot of everything in an enterprise, and so your software has to be architected in a way that works with anything. We have one Vault customer who serves only mainframes. They don't run Vault on a mainframe, it doesn't work, but the only clients of Vault are on mainframes, and so we had to make that work, and the mainframe can't make HTTP calls, so we had to make that work. And so there's that, there's compliance stuff. There's even if you're not like a highly regulated sort of company, like a financial or a federal entity, there's compliance. You're a public company. There's reporting requirements. Now GDPR introduces a whole new thing because every company is international in Fortune 500 space. That sort of stuff you could charge for really easily. Really basic stuff, I guess. I mean, from a developer, it seems basic. The joke Armand says is like, he's a very sarcastic guy, and that's his comedy, his humor. But he says, spend 4 years building distributed system, can't sell it for anything. Spend 3 months building a UI, sell it for $10 million. It's like that's sort of the idea. Is like they need UIs. They need the ability to restrict the UI because the person who has a ton of control is different from the everyday developer or user of that software. So the questions become, okay, I have Vault. It's this Swiss Army knife, or I have Terraform. It could do anything with the cloud. Like, how do I present to the user a very simple interface, but they just click buttons and things work. But on the back end, you have, everyone's sort of skilled in their own way, but you have highly skilled people with Terraform that are writing reusable modules or something really advanced that other people are consuming. Internally, we call it producer-consumer. Enterprise is really big on producer-consumer models. So how do you actually do that? How do you enable a group of 30 to serve a group of 1,000 in the company? Those are the big things. Support, they're going to need support. It's a big one too.
Support, SLAs, all the stuff that enterprises are willing to pay for.
Yeah.
So you and Armand are both CTOs, co-CTOs of HashiCorp right now. In the day-to-day, do you still find time to code, to contribute to the product?
Yeah, I still code a lot by design. Armand's role by design doesn't nearly as much. And when he does, we joke that he writes technical debt and then we figure out the rest. But it's by design. He doesn't have a lot of time to code, so when he codes, he's usually like, I made this thing work, but it's not mergeable. Like, I've shown you how it works, but you need to clean it up and add tests and various other stuff. But yeah, I think it's been super important for us to have co-CTOs. Honestly, we need more CTOs. But Armand focuses a lot on executive management, field CTO type work. He meets a lot with customers, does vision type stuff with executives at Fortune 500s, things like that. He works a lot with how the technology relates to the business side of thinking. Works with our CEO a lot. I meet with all those people, but I'm more focused on, I work more closely with our VP of engineering. I'm more focused on VP of product. I work with them really closely to how do we build the right roadmap, how do we build a healthy engineering culture, from basic stuff like how do we do an RFC process to propose changes. Like, I help design that with our VP of engineering and engineering managers, to stuff like how do I help marketing learn how engineering works so that they could take over websites but still be authentic to our technical user. And this will probably all sound super boring to developer, but like as a founder, it's super exciting because you're helping enable people to do things in, I don't know, your sort of dream, I guess. At the same time, I embed in teams periodically, usually for half the year, not consecutive. Like I'll block off half to 3/4 of the year to work directly on a project and help work on something. And a lot of that is, I'm usually embed on younger teams to help teach them the culture about things. And so this year I worked on Consul. I've worked on Consul since January. So I've been on the Consul team, and I'm exiting the Consul team in October. That's the plan. And we plan that out because we plan out hiring, we plan out transition plans, we plan out like, I don't want to be someone who builds technical debt. So how do I build something, have an overlap period where I work with someone else so that when I leave, they have all the context and they could just take over. And so that's sort of how it works. I like to code. I mean, it's sort of my passion. When I'm stressed out, like I'd rather code than like sit down with a glass of wine, right? That's how I release. And so it was important for me to figure out how to make a role that did that. And you don't get it by default. There was one whole year I went without coding, and that was the worst year of the company for me. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, cool. Are there any like new technologies in particular that you're exploring when you're spending time coding?
Yeah, I tend to bias towards those. But I don't. We're also careful because I don't want the engineers to think that only I get to work on new things. So like this year, for example, we worked on the whole new Consul Connect stuff, which is sort of like service mesh related, networking, service authorization, and stuff like that. And I led the team, but I worked with a team of 3-ish for 3 months, and then it turned to team of 5. And I sort of led that team as a technical leader. We had a manager to help me on the engineering management people side, but I technically led that team for a while, and I'll leave, and then next year the plan is that I'll probably work on another newer thing for a while. Same process. We'll start with a team of 3, incubate it, and then kind of go from there.
Cool. One more question right now. Like, do you have any advice for somebody out here who's like, a programmer who's starting out or DevOps engineer and just kind of like early in their career?
I mean, I guess a lot of college people ask me that, and I always say like, just try everything, because you don't really know what you like until you try it. And so I think the most valuable thing I did in college, but even out of college early on, was like I just played with everything. I played with every technology. I didn't go deep on very many things. I just like got basic things working, and I just started gravitating naturally towards like I had a lot of fun with that, and I really didn't like that. But even the stuff you don't like, you usually take something away. You usually learn something from it. So that's sort of what I did. I think I would stay away. It's too easy to be like, oh, this is an idea, this is an opportunity, I'm going to go really deep on it right away. Maybe you're right, like maybe, but I think you'll be better equipped if you're more well-rounded at first.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I think some of the best engineers that I've worked with have had a career that hasn't just been writing code from the beginning, right? Graduate college, go get a job as a programmer, but like have a more diverse background, like understand systems, understand networks, understand software, like how people are actually using it. So, cool. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? Mitchell?
Yeah, so going back to your early days of consultancy, it seems like the way you built your company was kind of colored by your experience there. And I've been in the room with some of your suits too, so how do you deal with the whole, working for Fortune 500, they want you on site, they want their product delivered, but you've got a fully remote team. How do you deal with that kind of clash?
It kind of helps because we seem bigger than we are to those enterprises when they meet us, because it'll be like a company in Boston, and they'll be like, oh, we need a salesperson, an engineer, whatever. And instead of flying people out, we're like, oh yeah, they're like local, so we'll just send them over there to you. And it makes us seem like they don't know they're working from home, but it makes us seem bigger than we are. The consultancy I didn't learn any of that stuff from the consultancy, because the consultancy I was working with like startups or wannabe startups and things like that, like pre-startup phase. But I learned a lot later about how to work with customers in that space. But it comes down to basic human stuff, I guess. It's like, for me, it's just like, be honest, be authentic, build good technology from one side, don't sell stuff that doesn't exist on the other side. And yeah, and a lot of people, like it's not anymore, but for a long time, the biggest deal we ever closed was a customer who came back to us because we walked away, because we went to them and we told them like, you're not ready for this software for these reasons. Like, we can't sell you a deal because if we sell you a deal and they wanted to pay us, it's like you'll fail and then it'll look bad for us. Like, for these non-technical reasons, the software won't get deployed right, it won't get consumed right, and it's going to fail, and you're going to blame us, and we can't have that. And so we told them what we recommended. You should talk to these consultants. You should do this other stuff, but we don't do that. So, like, come back, and they did. They came back 7 or 8 months later, and they hired consultants and did a lot of work, and we felt more comfortable, and we sold them a deal, and they said that they talked to like 3 or 4 of our competitors in the same category, and all of them didn't even care. They like just tried to sell them the biggest deal possible, and was like, your company's gonna be dramatically changed in these like 5 ways, and they were super turned off by that. They were like, they didn't like that, and so that we found someone that like philosophically aligned with us and helped us close what was it was actually our first multi-million-dollar a year deal ever, and so it was big.
What were some of these non-technical reasons that you thought make the product good?
Yeah, okay. I mean, good non-technical reasons are, okay, so the easy example is security. Security is a function that's very commonly centralized. And so it doesn't, if you're the type of company or vendor that goes into a company and says, you buy this, you'll be able to deploy 10 times faster blindly, you just say that, then you're very possibly wrong, because a lot of times in enterprises, your deploys have a step where they have to be approved by security. And if your development teams, you're going to microservices, you went from 5 development teams to 50, you have all these metrics that show you're successful microservices, and then what's hiding behind the covers is that those 50 microservices are hitting, Amdahl's law on the security side. It's like you are going to be slow. So it doesn't matter, and so that's what happened. This company came, they wanted to buy Terraform to automate cloud stuff, and we said no because we pointed out that they needed to learn how to use Vault, and they needed to learn how to use Vault embedded in development teams, or fix that bottleneck, because it's all going to just lock down. And you might as well just hire another centralized ops team. By the time they figure out how to deploy your stuff manually, the security team's still going to be digging through their Jira queue of stuff to approve. So that was the example in that case.
What are some like technologies you're excited about today, like things you're following or patterns you think will be really important in the future?
I mean, the cutting edge weird stuff, the big bets, I think that I'm watching. I'm not like super excited about it, but I think it represents a good opportunity is actually stuff like serverless. I don't think it's as big as people think it is. Like, I can't imagine really highly complex apps being written that way. But I think it has the opportunity in the same way SQL like revolutionized data like processing. Like, if you're a BI type person today, you have to know SQL. You have to know SQL. It's a given. But 10 years ago, you didn't have to know SQL. And in the same way, it's like serverless has the opportunity where in 10 years, if you're a BI person, a non-technical person, you have to know JavaScript or some language like that to be able to integrate with systems and pull the right data and do analysis and do tests, like company tests and things like that. And I think that's really interesting about it. Like how much boilerplate can we remove from the batch, simple-ish data streaming tasks and so I'm keeping an eye on that, but it's hard because if you look at like layers of deployment, if you look at mainframes, physical computers, VMs, containers, even schedulers actually come up in here, and then like serverless on top. You look, every single layer, you have to reinvent everything. You just have to. It's a negative thing, but it has to happen. Like you have to reinvent release management. You have to reinvent sort of traffic shaping equivalents like rolling deploy type stuff. You have to reinvent dependency management. All this stuff just that's solved at every lower level has to get reinvented, and that takes years, and it's a lot of work that feels wasteful because it feels solved already. And you hear this at every stage. Like when we started, the big thing was cloud. It was pre-Docker, things like that. The big thing was cloud, and all the negative vendors were like, cloud, it's all solved. VMware solved this already. Just go buy vSphere. You have all the tools. Like we have auto-scaling, we have DRA for data like replication or migration or whatever, and it's all solved. And they're not wrong, but it ignores all the benefits that you could have if you had those tools at the next layer. And so that's sort of what I think and I'm interested in. Yeah. Or it could be complete failure, but it's still interesting even if it fails. So. Yeah.
Do you think that's the right abstraction, or do you think there's a different? What's your ideal experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's what's the shortest path to business value is the ultimate question, and I don't know. I mean, in theory, I guess like removing all the boilerplate to just like submit some blocks of code and have them run on demand feels like closer to that answering that question more efficiently than what we have today. But I don't know. And it also doesn't get rid of anything, right? Like it just like, for the end user, it gets rid of a lot of stuff, but you're still gonna have a ton of operators wherever and things like that. But yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm just really curious about distributed companies and challenges with that. So just a couple random thoughts, questions. Like, do you guys try to synchronize people's time schedules at all? Is it totally asynchronous? Do you guys follow any sort of agile methodology? Do you try to hold regular stand-ups or anything like that?
Yeah, good question.
Any thoughts you have on that?
So,
Whole process of running a big distributed dev team.
Yeah, so this varies a lot by whoever you ask. Like our approach, and people will argue like it's not real distributed or something, it's a failure of our process, but we do require teams to overlap in time zone for 3 hours a day, I think. Every team member there has to be a 3-hour block where every team member is online. And that's the time where you schedule that synchronous work that you need to talk to somebody. That's when you schedule the video calls and things like that. That's when the managers could do all hands for the team. So we require 3 hours, and that's sort of how we gauge our hiring. So we actually open up hiring job recs a lot, which is like Consul team member or something, and it'll say available countries this, and it really pisses people off. We get really angry emails and tweets. I get like these flagrant tweets because people are like comfortably mean on the internet about how, we're liars and not real distributed, and like the meanest ones are stuff like, first world distributed only, like we're only hiring in London or something. And it's not, it's really limited by our processes, and the 3-hour lower overlap gives us a nice geographical limitation. So that's what we hire for. Yeah. Is that good? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
What about do you do agile, like that kind of?
Oh, project management stuff? It's like, I would say our project management is evolving. It's really annoying because we want to be more agile than we can be, because the way we deliver software is basically shrink wrap software, right? We're selling on-prem enterprise software to these Fortune 500s, and they do not want you to release software often. They don't want that. They want quarterly, bi-quarterly. They want, and regular. They don't want you to just release software in the middle, because then it confuses everybody. And so we have that pulling at us and fighting us, and then we have the open source, like GitHub, like we can move fast, release automation, let's just like ship releases sort of culture. And we're still trying to figure it out, I think. Right now, we're sort of at a cadence where we do quarterly releases, but we don't work that way internally. I mean, we have stuff ready to go in the middle, but we just wait because we also had to learn, like, the open source perspective is we'll just release software and let people use it. And that worked for a while, and then when you build like a real company, you realize there's so many other people that have to know about the software besides the engineers. Like, we spend a month training our salespeople and training our support people and building support runbooks and what could go wrong and what to do when it goes wrong, and support tooling of how to diagnose when things go wrong. And that takes time too. And so we now sort of do a month of work before a release that's just enablement work. And so the release technically is ready to go. We could just cut that stuff, but we have to do a release so that if a customer approaches our salespeople who are semi-technical, but they worked at companies like VMware and so on, like they know tech, but they're not engineers, and they ask them, okay, but why would I use Terraform over CloudFormation or something? Like, how do they answer that authentically? The way they answer that authentically is they open their library that we have internally, and we've, as engineers working with marketers, working with salespeople, built a deck for them that explains authentically what the difference is and what the benefits are, and they use that to present, and they're trained on how to present on that. And it's just, busy work, but it's super valuable, but doesn't make the product any better, but makes the business better. And so we're still figuring it out, but all that stuff has to be sort of taken into account.
But you release on the open source side continuously?
Bug fix releases, but not more major releases.
Okay, so you'll hold back on the open source side in that regard too?
For about a quarter, yeah. Or well, for weeks leading up to a quarter, yeah.
In order to kind of create the enablement?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, and the enablement stuff's kind of nice. It gives our engineers time, because we don't need every engineer to work on that. It gives engineers time to start other projects, and also it just gives them time. We try to use that time to, it's hard, but we're trying to get to the point where we could give them that time off in the sense that just work on GitHub issues, write some blog posts, like do something that's less in the weeds, I guess, like non-dev time. Some teams are still like non-stop coding, but we're trying to get that better. Yeah.
So you have like ICs, individual contributors, and you have the management structure. What sort of challenges being a fully distributed company pose to the management team?
A lot.
As opposed to the ICs, or
Yep.
the developers?
Yeah, so management, I mean, I don't come from a management background, so I've had to learn this from other professional past managers, but it's very different, and we've learned that we can't hire a successful manager that's always, like, we can't hire a manager with 15 years experience that's only worked in an office and just be like, go be successful. Like, it won't work, because you can't, the communication's totally different. Like, you can't, a manager could see if someone, you could see across the room if someone's working and if they're happy, and body language, and are they leaving work early? Are they, and not from a disciplinary perspective. It could be like it could be signals that they're unhappy with their work. You don't get that in a remote culture. Like, their bubble could be green on Slack, and they could be like browsing Reddit, and not because they're not working. Again, it's because they have other issues going on, right? And so our managers have to reach out. They reach out basically on a daily basis with everyone on the team. Just, how are you doing? Basic stuff like that. You have to be a lot more, all the same, you have the same job, but it's communicated slightly differently. Like, you still care about how do you make your direct reports achieve their goals in the company? Like, do you want to work on Nomad your whole career? Or do you want, like, in a year, do you want to be on the Vault team? Like, I need to know that now so that we could plan for that. Like, you're still working on career pathing and project pathing and employee happiness and all that stuff as a manager, but it has to be over text. And, well, there's Zooms and there's video chats, but you have to do that in a way that you can't see the person. Yeah.
How about like within the management team itself? Not just managing down.
They work very much like RACs, I guess. We use Google Groups a lot, so we have management groups that talk about challenges they have or proposals. Like, we recently had a lot of chatter about standardizing our engineering interview process, and that was done across the management group. There's a management group in Slack, and they also do weekly manager, like, all hands, and the point of our all hands is, this isn't consistent again. Like, I think the part of a startup is that you're not consistent, like, you're working on that consistency, but we're trying to make it so that don't bring the positive stuff. Like, let's celebrate the positive stuff asynchronously or for a really short period of time. Like, bring the challenges, because synchronous time in a remote company is super, super expensive. You're synchronizing across time zones. People who work remote generally don't want to be synchronous. Like, video chat is the worst part of your day. And so, like, how do you minimize the amount of video chat? So we're like, let's make this efficient. Bring the topics discussed, pre-distribute decks and documents and so on, so people could come well-read to the meeting. And to the manager's meeting, I don't go every week, but I hop in here and there, and it's very much that focus, and I think that's important. Yeah. Trying to think.
Quick extension to the release cadence question before. Do you guys anticipate doing long-term support releases for customers that are running on, N-2 major releases in production for 5 years?
Yeah, LTS stuff. I'm so shocked still today that we haven't been asked for this. We have been asked for it, and we just said no, and they've said okay. And it's like, yeah. And so I'm so shocked no one said no back to us. So we are starting to plan for that. We know it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. So we're starting to plan for that, and it's funny how that relates to everything. Like, it's affecting how we do Git, right? Like, I'm having conversations right now with our VP engineering and engineering managers or leaders, tech leaders, We have engineering managers, we have engineering leads. Engineering leads are ICs, right? I'm working with them on like, what's our Git process? What is our branch naming and how do we backport things and how do we test those backports? And then that leads to our VP of Eng thinking, I need to hire QA people because how do we formalize QA across backports? Like it's so crazy how problems are so much bigger than they feel like they should be. We're starting to plan for that. We don't do it at all right now. We have no LTS. We do custom binaries once in a while for customers. It's pretty sketchy. Yeah, we have one customer. It's actually pretty cool. We have one customer, super big. They're actually our second biggest Consul deployment in the world, and they have unique challenges, unique problems, and they are running they've been running a dev build that they've been updating bi-weekly on production, like top 50, Alexa top 50 website. They've been running a dev build in production for months, and it breaks all the time, but it's cool because they have the technical, they don't care because they're like, our data center failover is so good, let's just run the dev build in production, and when it fails, we'll fail over the data center, and they do. And it's one of those websites where if it went down, it would be like such a huge news piece, and it goes down we bring it down all the time. And it's never been an issue because they have good data center failover. That's dope because it's given us the best real world data ever. And we have a great relationship with their ops team, so we'll throw them dev builds. We're like, we have this like super experimental like Raft change, which is super scary to us. So can you deploy it to your 50,000 node cluster and tell us like if leadership is stable? And they're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, they test in production, but they also have some amazing ops maturity. Do you have a question? I got skipped. Yeah.
Well, you addressed it in a couple of different ways, but I'm just thinking like back to your original dev team, getting from the mindset of pushing to GitHub all the time or open source to quarterly deployments, like from a management perspective.
Everyone was fine.
Really?
Yeah, we had no pushback whatsoever. I think they were happy because it became less stressful. When releases were more ad hoc, I think it was a little more stressful for them of like, when's it coming and are we ready? And now they know. I mean, you could fix that with a non-quarterly release cycle, but we went from that to quarterly, and now they know when it is. We have fixed processes. They know there's a month buffer where there's enablement, and that's a good time to do betas and RCs and stuff like that. I think it got less stressful. Like I said earlier, there's still tons of problems we're trying to address, but we had no pushback.
I guess I'm thinking more from like the creative process side of it.
For a developer?
Yeah.
I mean, you can work on anything whenever you want, so it just may not hit master. So I think there's still creative process. There's we have this one guy in the company who is a mad scientist, like spends way too much free time reading about like cutting edge distributed system stuff. And he has all sorts of awesome recommendations. It's like, I'm gonna work on this with our core RAF library and stuff like that. And we're finding time to let him work on it. And it's like, that doesn't need to align quarterly at all. So he's like thinking about that mid-quarter. He has some other tasks, and part of the management's job is to help make that a reality and figure out, communicate with the people so that he doesn't have to find the time and stuff like that. So that's what we're doing.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sam, right?
Yes, yeah. So you're your co-founder, co-CTOs, which is kind of a rare thing. At what point did you, I don't know much about your corporate structure, at what point did you decide you needed a CEO? Did you guys look at each other and say, do you want to be CEO?
Yeah. So I was the CEO up to about 50 employees, 50, if it comes out as 15 or something. And that worst year of my life, not my life maybe, but like the worst year of the company's, and it's all relative, like I'm still very lucky, but like the worst year of the company's existence for me personally was when I sort of realized like I really didn't enjoy it. Like I learned that CEO is like, that's a job. That is like, there's like some real like expected responsibility that I don't want to think about. And I had to, and that's when I wasn't coding, and I was like CEOing full time. I talked to my co-founder about it, about like, I don't know what to do. I'm not really happy about the situation. And so we decided to split CEO duties, which helped, right? It helped in the short term, but it took away from other stuff that was happening. But that's when we had the talk, which was like, I think if we could find the right person, we should bring in a CEO. And it sort of started kicking off. And you don't just like stumble upon a CEO. Like we had to hire an executive search firm and make it a reality. And so that's when we kicked that off. We approached the board. We said, we want to do this. They were super supportive about it. And so it took us 18 months then. It took us over a year to find the CEO. We talked to dozens of people that were more than qualified, but we were trying to find someone culturally aligned and someone who got the product vision and someone who got open source. That was tough. And realize we were at the time when we were bringing on the CEO, we were probably $1 million a year in revenue, which if you're bringing on that caliber person, anything less than 10 million a year is like this crazy risk. Like, what is this company doing? Like 10 million for a venture company, like 10 million is the point where it's like, okay, you're probably like a legit company for that type of search, for a C-level type of search. And so it was hard to convince people because we found some people we really liked, and for very real reasons, they were just like, you know, my husband or my wife, like, I can't join a company this young. Like, I got a family, I got a life. I can't like dedicate the time that would make it authentic. And we didn't expect, you know, that much time, but also these types of experienced people know that to do the job really well, you gotta dedicate yourself to it. So it was really hard. And then we found Dave, who joined, and he's been awesome, and it's just been better ever since. So I think that I did like another type of panel type this, interview thing type like this with one of our investors, and he asked both Armand and I separately, 2 different like interviews, what was the best decision we ever made as founders, and both of us said it was hiring Dave as CEO. It was so important, and not just because it helped us personally, he legitimately made the business succeed, right? Like he brought the experience and brought the enterprise know-how and strategy to get us to make decisions that we wouldn't have made. Like he consulted us on them, but we wouldn't have made those decisions. And there were times when Armand and I were like, this feels a little weird, but he hasn't stumbled yet. So it's been pretty crazy. Yeah, really important.
And you get to go back and write code and kind of dive back into the product.
Eventually, it's not atomic, but eventually it's gotten better every year. So it's more and more, yeah. I think like the goal, in my opinion, the goal of a founder is to move from working at the company to working on the company, if that makes sense, right? You need to separate yourself from being in the path of resistance, from blocking any sort of action within the company. Like everyone in the company needs to be able to work without you. So you need to be able to step back and work on it. And by that I mean the RFC processes, like the Git branch management, and I'm working on issues, but I'm not blocking anything. No one needs to wait for me or Armand's approval to get things done. And that we're not there yet. We're not 100% successful yet. There's still stuff we block, but that's how we sort of view things. And when we finish one thing, that's how we plan the next thing. We sort of like look and it's like, what depends on us? Why? How do we make it not depend on us? And so that's how we move forward.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? Was the distributed thing a non-starter for a lot of CEO candidates, or was it a non?
Yep, definitely. For a lot of people, but executives especially, yeah, definitely. It's a non-starter. From a CEO perspective, none of them are audacious enough to say, like in an interview, or it's not really an interview because it's very bi-directional, but in a meeting where they'll say, well, I want to centralize the company. Like no one's that bold, but you could tell that people aren't comfortable with it. Yeah.
And what was worse, the open source the open source side or the remote side of the company for the CEO you interviewed?
Well, we already filtered out, before we even talked to them, we already filtered out people that had an open source background in some sense. So the open source is kind of comfortable. And a lot of people we talked to had they could, again, I'm stereotyping, but they're generally really smart, successful people, and they could see the value of open source and stuff. So that wasn't that hard of a sell. Remote's a little harder right now.
Is that changing?
Yeah, I mean, I think more people are realizing you have to do remote. I think people are realizing you have to do remote for the wrong reasons right now. I think people are looking at prices of office space and salaries in like the Bay Area, and they're like, oh, we have to do remote because we can't afford to hire. And it's super true. I mean, like, we've lost so many engineers that were awesome to outrageous cash offers from Google and Facebook and people in the Bay Area that are centralized for the most part. And they have different offices, but you have to go to the office. They're centralized for the most part, and we just can't. A startup can't compete, or it's fiscally irresponsible to compete with those offers, and so that's super annoying. But you have a higher chance if you open your door as much as you can, and so that's a good reason. But I think they're not. I think the greater, community is not looking at all the other reasons why it's important too. Yet, but I think it'll move there.
So what time do you start your days to match like from California to the UK or France? Like I guess it's 7 a.m. here or?
I actually work very regularly 9 to 5.
Okay.
No, I mean I work at night, but like at night I'm usually working off Slack. I'm working, but I'm not doing meetings or emailing that hard or anything. I'm working on something. But Europe you could overlap with in the morning. So I could get the really hard region is Asia Pacific is a really hard region. So we've biased to not hire there as much. We have teams there, but we have way more in Europe. So especially on the engineering side, I don't think we have any engineers in Asia Pacific actually. But it's very difficult. Yeah. Yeah. So I work pretty standard 9 to 5. I think one of the benefits of working remote, and I love this, is that I block parts of my calendar so that I could ride my stationary bike, or like I could go to lunch with like my fiance or whatever. Like I could do things that are so hard to do when you're in an office, and I think that's the really mentally, personally, emotionally healthy aspect of working remote. And we totally we don't watchdog people. Are you committing code? Or we don't do any of that. Even at 300 people, it's very much an honor system. And people all the time, our remote employees talk all the time about how like I need to take this time off because I want to pick up my kids, or my kids have like an Easter party at school that I want to go to, and we're like, go, whatever. And so I think that's a huge benefit that an office doesn't give you. So yeah.
So during the lifetime of HashiCorp, I feel like there's been this huge everyone got super excited about DevOps and Docker, and then everyone got really excited about DevOps and Kubernetes, right?
Yeah.
And HashiCorp still growing, and kind of, it feels like you don't chase as much as a lot of other companies do. Is that a strategy? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's both a downfall and a positive thing. One of our core principles of the company that we publish is we are pragmatic, and I would say we're painfully pragmatic. We do stuff that is highly customer driven, but also what we believe technically is the right thing at the given time. So I don't know, it's hard because, and this recently happened with our release of Connect, which is our service mesh thing. It doesn't currently support layer 7 type filtering, and it's coming in the fall actually, but people were like, how can you possibly launch this without layer 7? And we had 13 beta customers that are in the Fortune 500. So 13 out of 500 of the companies were running the beta. And then we currently have over 24 running POCs to deploy it at a multi-hundred minimum node scale. And it's not one of those companies, not one, runs a ton of layer 7 services. They're very rare. And in the grand scheme of things, in the global, it's layer 4 TCP as a minimum common denominator is critical. So identity has to be at layer 4 for us, for our customers. It has to be. They're of course moving to layer 7 services. It's on the roadmap almost exclusively. That's definitely the future, and so we will support that. But that's the example of we lose some hype because of that, because we launched without this very important feature for open source and startups and things like that. But we're also trying to fund ourselves, and so we don't fail as a business. And to fund ourselves, to get this in the hands of customers fastest, we have to do these kind of boring things. And so the boring things are kind of fundamental things, and that's an example of how we're driven. Kubernetes and Docker are the same way, because we're actually doing a ton of Kubernetes work right now. I think it'll be really exciting. We're doing a ton of like first-class native kube integrations with Consul and Vault that are a lot. Like Consul over the next 2 months will have 6 or 7 kube native features built into it and stuff like that. Like a ton of work. And so we believe in it, but we want that to be first class. But we also have customers running mainframes, and so we have to figure out mainframe interoperability first class. We do both. We're very pragmatic at the moment, yeah. And so I think the perception sometimes of HashiCorp is like, oh, they don't care about Docker, or they don't care about Kubernetes. And it's like, I don't tell people, oh, you're wrong. Like, you might be totally right in the moment. We're late to do some of this stuff, but I think it's because we're hyper-focused on a specific, type of user at the moment. To our detriment to us. We're trying to fix that in some ways, but that's where it comes from.
We'd probably end up with like supporting more long-term technologies, right? Instead of like chasing every potential hot lead, it's like you know.
Yeah, so our CEO likes to say, it's true. He says that, one of the most important things for our customers is our customers don't tend to view us as a vendor. They tend to view us as like a strategic partner because we're not helping them solve this one problem. We had the entire, I can't tell you the company, I guess, but we had the entire like infrastructure executive team from a boring Midwest company representing, I forgot what their budget was. It was like $2 billion a year just for infrastructure in our office for no reason other than like, what should we do next? Please tell us, please help us. Like, we don't know what we need. You tell us. And it's like, that's the type of relationships we're trying to build. And the way we build those is because our approach is, how do we make you successful at what you have today while helping you get to the future tomorrow? So it's like, okay, you're adopting Kubernetes. Awesome. Like, we're going to help you do that. But how long is it going to take you to move? Okay, your long-term goal is to move 95% of workloads to Kubernetes. How long is that going to take you? Okay, it's going to take you 2.5 years, let's say. Like, they'll estimate this stuff. It'll be like, that's going to take us 2.5 years if we do this many per month and all this stuff. It's like, okay, so how do we make it so those 2.5 years you're still, innovating, and it's awesome, and you're deploying more apps faster, and you're more secure in your physical data centers? How do we make it so that the kube services can communicate to your, peered on-prem data center? How do we do all this stuff for you so that you end up in a almost pure Kubernetes workload, but you're using the right software in the meantime? And so that's a very different approach, I think, for us as a company versus a lot of other people that will do kube first, kube native, or Docker first, Docker native like type of solutions where you solve that problem first and move out. And it's hard for me to understand the pragmatics of that because our market segment is not kube first. They're burdened with legacy, and it's like kube is the end goal. So how do you get there?
I have maybe a
Yeah, tell me, JJ.
No, slightly controversial question.
Founder of KubeCon.
No, I'm not going to let you get out. Just slightly controversial question on all your comments in the last 2 minutes. I think you guys deserve a huge amount of credit for like sort of appreciating heterogeneity. Enterprises are kube eventually, not kube first.
I sense a shit sandwich.
No. I think what it is just I'm curious about like how Kubernetes is a super huge fragmented ecosystem. There isn't really one company around Kubernetes. Red Hat's contributing a lot. They've been the number 2 contributor. Obviously, Google's probably the number 1 contributor, but not by more than maybe 15 or 20% at this point across hundreds of companies contributing. So as you've sort of laid down your opinions around Nomad and around Consul for service discovery and around different projects that sort of intersect with different deep opinions Kubernetes has architecturally about things, how are you, it's more of an open-ended question, I guess, in terms of the roadmap and the transition of these heterogeneous environments into eventually being kube first. Mm-hmm. How are you, partnering and sort of supporting these customers over that 5+ year like transition?
Yeah, so customers people we're already talking to, it's easy because we could prove it to them with the roadmap and things like that. It's the people that aren't talking to us and the partners we're trying to get that are the hardest. And I think part of that's our fault, and that's what we're trying to fix with like a lot of this Consul work, is we want to show that we're hiring full-time Kube people to work on this stuff who are committed, like we believe in it. We want to show people that, yeah, we have Nomad, and we have a very serious corporate philosophy that across product lines, we don't care about competition. Like, just because we have Nomad, we're going to integrate super well with Vault and Consul and Terraform on Kubernetes and ignore Nomad. And we're integrating with Nomad too, but it's like, that's our philosophy. And so we have to do some of that work to prove that we're being honest. And then on the other side, I mean, I think the partners see that, and the value we bring to a lot of these heavily opinionated Kube people is the multi-system ideals, I think, is, you know, I'll give you an example, is that we're working on some Consul features, for example. You know, we don't try to replace like Kube config or Kube secrets or Kube service discovery. I think if you're in the ecosystem, all those things are awesome. From a user experience perspective, sometimes you want some stuff on the back end, like Kube secrets aren't encrypted by default, but we're helping make that a reality. But you want to use those, and we don't want to come and be like, don't use that native Kube thing, use Consul. But what we want to do instead is like, how can we make it so that parts, subsets of the Consul KV are automatically synced and replicated into config maps, so you could use stuff like that. How do we make it so Vault TLS certificates automatically show up in secret volumes so they could be mounted into pods? That's how we're integrating first class, and the reason why you'd want to use that instead of purely the first class thing is usually interoperability. We could also help make, I know that it's totally technically possible, but multi-zone, multi-region, multi-data center Kube is not the simplest thing. So how do we make that easier? Because we have years of experience running secrets in multi-data center and stuff like that. Like, how do we get that out of there for you? That's how we're trying to integrate. We're not trying to fight the opinions of Kube. We're trying to, I don't know, I hate this word, but we're trying to like bring some synergy with those things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I lived in the Bay Area a little too long. There's just synergy everywhere. It's just crazy. Synergizing. Yep.
Yeah, so I've used some of the technologies like first one was Vagrant and obviously Terraform and Vault at last company. What
Cool.
do you recommend for teams that are sort of like in that transition period where their DevOps ability is not necessarily at the mature enough maybe necessarily for some of your products, but at the same time, you know, it's more complex than necessarily like some of the very simple managed solutions that already have.
That's on us. We are working really hard. We started up a new team the beginning of this year, 2 teams. So we started up the product education team. So we have full-time people working on education, which is docs, technical writing, but also interactive content like Katacoda Instruct, stuff like that, and also video guides, like 5-10 minute goal solution-oriented video guides. So we have that. We're going to launch that for Vault with 30 different topics in about, let's say 2 months on the outset, so that's coming. That's part of it, is like, how do we lower the barrier to entry so that it's not complex? The other side, I think, is the technical side. So we also spun up an effort this year, and again, it's going to start hitting in a few months, where we're starting to build installers. And the installers aren't just install and run. The experience, the motivation I sort of sent down to the engineering team was like, we've all installed WordPress at some point in our lives. You know, you just click through, and at the end of it, you have a blog that just works, and you didn't have to like touch anything, and it tells you if permissions are wrong and all sorts of stuff. It's like, how do we make that the end goal for our products? Like, how do you actually just like throw a binary in some terrible folder, like some shared like chmod 077 folder, just run Vault in there, and it just guides you through like, this folder is an awful choice, and like other things, and gets you to a successful like secure deployment. And so we're coming out with that. But it goes beyond that. I joke that it's like Clippy, but hopefully not as annoying. But we have in the UI and in all our products, but in Vault in a couple months, we have a contextual help thing. And so if you go to any page, there'll be a little special color icon that shows up. And if you click that color icon for the page you're on, if you're looking at a AWS secret backend, you click that, and it'll link to all the stuff our education team did. Do you want to see a video guide on how to use this thing that you're looking at right now? Do you want to do all stuff and make that better? So that's all coming, and I think the right answer for your question is that they should use it. if the problems are more complex than what a managed service can give them, then they should be able to use the software. Like this, there shouldn't be a gap there.
If you don't mind to follow up, would that also include like best practices? Like, because some of the tools are great in my experience, but boy, can you really mess it up sometimes.
Yeah, it'll include like recommended ways to use it. Yeah,
Cool. Thanks.
opinionated ways, I guess.
Did you get some friction internally about like the number of tools you release? Like, did you get like you have too many products, or did you get scared not to focus on something?
Yeah, so we got both. This is funny. We had our company we do once a year, all employees go to one place. This year we did San Diego, and we had, at the time we were like 240 people. We had them all in a session for a panel with me, Armand, and Dave, and we were reading through questions, and we pre-submit the questions. We read them all, we answer them all, we don't filter them, but we pre-submit them so we don't have to waste sort of time asking who stuff. And so one of the questions was, they're anonymous, so I still don't know who did it and whether they were sarcastic or not. But the question was, I'm afraid we don't have enough products. What are our plans to fill against? And I think we all laughed, and I think we didn't answer that question. But generally, yeah, I mean, we get asked all the time. Our board, especially early on, asked all the time because we weren't making any money, and we'd go to like board meetings and be like, all right, we're gonna start a secrets management product. And they'd be like, are you gonna make money from the other ones? Like, what's the plan? And they never push back. We've had a very supportive board, but they ask it. I mean, they ask it. And we want to introduce a couple more tools, but we have to weigh that against, because it is, you know, the constraint of a startup is capital, generally, money. So, okay, let's start a new product. That has to be at least 2 or 3 people. That's at least like, with benefits and everything, like that's gonna be like $450,000 a year fully loaded. Like, would we rather spend that $450,000 a year on a new product, or would we rather make Vault Education and installers better? And we have to like balance these choices. And so now we've gotten past the adulthood realities, and now like the crushing realities of like P&Ls are hitting and not being able to do everything you want to.
Did you think to kill some of the existing products?
We have, yeah.
Okay.
We killed Otto. I mean, yeah, we very rest in peace. Well, it's androgynous, I guess, but Otto, yeah, I mean, we decided it wasn't the right direction. We've also killed smaller, I mean, that was a full project, but we've also killed smaller initiatives. I think we're pretty pragmatic about it. It's just, if we don't think there's a market fit or we're doing the wrong thing, we'll kill it. We do a lot of one team, go work sort of outside of the whole team on some new initiative, because we don't know if it'll work, and you have 6 months to like build an MVP, and we'll do some work of reaching out to customers if it's real. We've shut down a lot of those.
Gmail came out of 20% time at Google. Do you have a similar 20% time structure at HashiCorp?
We want to.
Flexible, unstructured, like?
No, but if someone comes to their manager and says, I want to work on this thing that isn't directly aligned, we'll try to find a way for them to work on that. But it's not, we do want to make it so that you have something like that, but we don't have it right now.
Is it really 80 plus 20, or is it 100 plus 20?
What? Oh, I don't know. I didn't work there.
It's 100 plus 20.
100 plus 20. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, you were right.
Just kind of just goes with what you were saying. I know you talked about serverless earlier, but what is like the problem that you wish you could solve, or what's like the new product that you have been saying no to that you want, like problem that you want to solve?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess one we wanted to solve but we felt was too high up the stack for us. We even built a prototype, I was talking to you about it, is using SQL as a way to hide and coordinate and ensure sort of ACID-like properties across distributed systems. So we built a prototype that used Consul for locking and some other stuff where it's like you could use Active Record or SQL Alchemy or choose your ORM of choice because it's just SQL. And the really basic example was like, you're a bank. How do you have a microservice that is your account balance and a microservice that actually does like ledgers and transactions and transfer $200 between people without going negative if you're hitting it, right? And how do you make that safe? A database makes that really safe. Constraints, ACID, do an update, it's serializable, done. How do we actually bring those properties to a like proxy type thing that's coordinating across like a Go service here and a JavaScript service here, but it's SQL. It's actually like an, select from this, update, whatever, and the tables are services and things like that. It's a neat idea. The thing I like about that idea, and this comes back to the pragmatism, and you'll see it in our products, is we're big least common denominator people. We use DNS as service discovery. We use layer 4 as service identity. There's a lot of least common denominator, and like SQL felt like a really powerful least common denominator that applications have been coded against for decades now, actually. And it's maybe that's a way to bring microservices and make them not painful and bring like these consistent properties to them. So like I said, we built a prototype. It had serious issues, but it felt good, and the feeling to me, that's what guides me. So I was like, I think this could work, but I don't know. Go for it.
How, I don't know, distributed is your engineering culture? Do you have central guidelines for things like, I don't know, code style, libraries, test coverage, stack?
Here and there.
Up to the teams?
Yeah, we're needing that more and more as we keep growing. So some stuff, we have like approved libraries that you must use because we don't want one testing library over here and a totally different testing library over here. So there is a doc of approved libraries, and if it's not on there, you do have to email the engineering list and propose it and why not others. And we want it to be friction on purpose because we don't want you to easily be able to just pull in whatever dependency. We want you to actually think about it. So there's that. There's strict rules about open source licenses. So we run stuff like FOSSA scans. We do FOSSA scans. We do manual. Our legal team manually is watching and picking up on changes in open source library usage, because it could be detrimental for an enterprise relationship if we sneak in like a GPL thing. So there's strict guidelines for what libraries you can't use. And basically it's like if it's not understand the license and choose the right thing. If it's not on the list, you can't use it. And if it's not on the list, here's our legal email, and they'll vet it. Like you can't just say, oh, it's copyleft, it's permissive, or whatever. It's email them.
Don't you guys have a different license?
Yeah, aren't you like Mozilla public license, right?
Yeah, but it's a standard license.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, Mozilla too.
What like led to that decision?
We asked our lawyers early on what we should use. We were all MIT before. The thing that scared our lawyers about MIT in 2012 was it's like a paragraph, and the thing about that is it's nice for a reader because you could like understand, you can understand, but the whole point of law is to bring exactness to like human language, and a paragraph isn't very exact. And so our lawyers read this and it's like, okay, I like what it says, but I really don't like what it doesn't say. And so MPL2 was basically, consult your own lawyer or whatever, but it was basically told to us like it's pretty much MIT but better defined. And there was really important clauses in MPL2, like usage of our software does not grant you implicit access to our like trademarks and patents and things like that. And that's maybe implied, but maybe not in MIT, and there's no legal precedent to guide us either way. So it's like, let's just avoid it.
I'm curious if you've gotten any like pushback or any like friction from enterprise customers about the MPL2.
It's a pretty permissive, it's a very permissive license. It's used by Firefox and things like that, but it's gotten pushback in the sense that procurement teams and enterprises have like also a list of open source licenses that if you use that license, they could just check the box and like get closer to sending you money. And MPL2 is not often on that list, and so it just adds weeks minimum to the process as they have to research that. And the sad thing is we're not a big enough company where when we go to procurement and the lawyers are looking at our contracts, we're not going to their general counsel. Like it's like fresh out of college, new lawyer that's following a very strict set of rules. And when something is not right, they just redline it and send it back to us, and we explain it to them, but they don't have the power to like change it. And so then it has to get escalated. And then, let's say the deal size is like $150,000. These people that are escalating to are like dealing with the like $40 million a year Oracle contract. So like, what is this, ant crap that's on my desk? Like, I don't want to deal with this. And it adds a lot of time because we're bottom of the stack. So it's like any deal takes priority. And so we'll have deals that are ready to go, they're ready to pay us, and we just can't close it for months and months and months because we're waiting for some more experienced lawyer to look at it.
So how come MPL2 isn't on this list? Is there like...
It's less common. Yeah, it's less common. I mean, I think the most like common ones that they look for are Apache 2, actually. Apache 2 is the most widely accepted from an enterprise perspective. I don't know why we didn't use, I mean, it has its own sort of challenges, but I think that the open source community has shown that they're not super real. So we probably could have used that Yeah. I think at the time we started, Apache 2 legally was thought to require a CLA, contributor license agreement, and I was super opposed to requiring any sort of documentation before a pull request could be submitted. But a lot of big companies have shown comfort with an implicit CLA, which there wasn't comfort with in 2012. So I don't know, things change.
So this one's kind of more for my team this year, but you use Replicated.
Yeah.
And so, like, why did you guys choose to use Replicated? What's the experience been like, and then what can we do better?
Yes, so Replicated's been great. So why use Replicated? So build versus buy, right? That's what it comes down to. And as a developer, I thought we could just build whatever. Like we're a technical company, we hire great engineers, let's just build stuff. But you want to work on your core competency, and as you grow as a company, if you could buy something from a vendor that you feel like the work is quality and their culture is quality, they're going to be working on features to improve that while you're working on features to improve your core business. And that's really attractive. And so, maybe it's a maturity thing, I don't know, but we're super in the buy camp now. It's like if it's not directly related to our core business and we think it's good software, then we would rather buy it. We'll pay for it. And we need to pay for it because like Replicate's a good example. It's how we deliver some of our enterprise software. And so like we need to pay for it because if it breaks, then our software is broken. And so like we need support and things like that. I don't know the details of our contract, but I'm sure that was, it was funny because actually I remember when we were negotiating the contract, and I didn't look at the contract, but I remember we were negotiating it and I saw some of the red lines and I was like, we've turned into the company I hated. Like as a founder, like we've turned into that company. But I get why it's there now. I understand. But yeah, we use it to deliver our on-premise Terraform experience, Terraform Enterprise experience. And we had our own installer before. And we had 3 full-time people working on the installer. We had it deployed in AWS. And we had because of our heterogeneous nature as a company, we had customers that wanted Oracle. We had customers that wanted Azure. We had all this other requirements. We had customers that wanted specifically to run it on Kubernetes. There was all this stuff, and so we're like, okay, we'll build it. We started planning out. The arrogance I think we had was that we built Terraform, we built Packer, we built all these tools that like theoretically you just glue together and you get an on-prem installer theoretically. Turns out there's like a lot more to it, especially when you get to stuff like upgrades and things like that. And the requirements were endless, and so that I think we took a step back when it became it's almost embarrassing the level of pain it took before we stepped back from that hubris or whatever it is to be like, we need to buy this, because it came to the point where it was like, not existential, the company wouldn't have like ceased to exist, but we would be leaving a ton of money on the table if we didn't deliver Azure Oracle, Azure Oracle Kubernetes like all in 6 weeks. Yeah. If we didn't deliver all of it, then, and we had a plan that was like 2 months per platform, optimistically. So it's like 6 months or 6 weeks if we can negotiate this deal and get it going. And I think one of our engineers showed a POC of Replicated working like that. Yeah. And it's like 2 days to get it working. And that was all it took. It's like, okay, yeah, we're out of this game. And now it's nice because we use Replicated. Those 3 engineers, some of them work with Replicated a lot, but they focus on other things making it better. And of course we ran through like all this accounting and stuff to figure out the build versus buy costs, and it was way better to buy.
And how can we improve? What would be helpful?
Well, how can you improve? Yeah. I don't know enough about the pain points of what that whole experience to answer that in an honest way. I know that we're really happy with it, but I know that there's things we want to be better, but it's not like blockers to anything. Yeah, I mean, I was just telling Mark actually earlier, one of the issues we actually have is a pre-replicated pre-flight check. So there are legal, contractual reasons why we can't give you the replicate installer before you sign the deal. Like we can't give it to you. And so you would think it's like all bits on a server. Like you'd think you could just like throw somebody some bits, but like there's reasons related to how you could recognize revenue on your reports so that when you hopefully one day become public or get bought, your accounting is clean, that we can't give you that we can't give you the software.
ASC 606.
606, but also, yeah, I mean, in general, 606, yeah. So if you ever want to read about corporate accounting, Google 606. It's so boring. So we've been developing our own like pre-flight checks, which is like a non-enterprise script that we could give to our support and solutions engineers and prospects. Like, run this on your server, and if it returns green, Replicated will probably work. But if there was a way Replicated could actually give us a thing that's not embedded with any of our enterprise stuff that you could run and be like, Replicated will almost certainly work, then that would be great.
I think we're pretty close on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
We'll talk on Slack.
Yeah, we'll give you the data access tomorrow.
Okay, nice.
Cool. Great. Thanks,
What
everyone.
was the name HashiCorp?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh my God. Yeah, that question gets asked all the time because I don't know. It's so I actually have owned a legal entity around HashiCorp since I was like just out of high school because it's what I did all this consulting under. So when I quit my job and started doing this sort of work, I was doing it under HashiCorp, and then because it existed already. And then Armand joined like 6 months later. And so we had a serious, I was like, I expected the name to change, obviously. And so I was like, let's change the name. The thing to know about both of us is like we super love just coding and tech. And so I think we spent one afternoon, like not a very serious amount of time, we spent like one afternoon trying to think of company names. And there was two things that popped up. One was like throwing up Armand, like throwing up his hands and being like, you know, screw it, like who cares like what the name is, let's just like code. And then the other side of it was Hashi means bridge in Japanese, and Armand really liked the attachment of like, one of our goals as a company was this approach of like, we're not gonna build a shiny thing and be like, you have to rewrite all the stuff, or like, here's a shiny world you could get to. We actually wanted to build like the bridges and the whole path to actually get from where you are to the shiny future. And Armand loved that, and I knew no one would ever get that, and it would just be like, you named it after yourself, which like, it is, right? Like that's where that name originally came from. No, I'm not refuting that, but yeah, that's sort of how it stuck. Yeah, it's not a good idea. I don't recommend it. It leads to a certain level of emotional attachment to a company that can sometimes feel overbearing.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. There's still some beer and some food. We'll be around for a little while longer.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.